Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Odyssey House Journals. I'm Randall Carlisle. I have a special guest today, Marty Blaustein, and we are looking back to, we are celebrating this year Odyssey's 50th birthday, which we've been around a long time. So have you, Marty.
I have, yeah.
You were, your first position at Odyssey House here was administrative director,
Right.
which meant what?
It basically meant that I was going to train the local director, and I was going to be basically responsible for handling all the treatment affairs of all the residents that were part of the original core group, and all the new people that would be coming in.
What was it? I'm sure a lot of people have driven by our original house, which is on, what?
68 South. I think it's 68 South.
6th East,
Yeah.
right? It's that two-story or three-story building that has
three-story.
blue and white, and it has a big Odyssey sign in front.
Right.
And that was the only place that Odyssey had back then.
That's right.
Now we've got like 26 locations or something.
Yeah.
When you first came there and we first opened our doors, what was the program like? I mean, you know, what were daily activities like in the house?
Well, the daily activities was basically to survive. We didn't have a lot of money. I mean, they didn't pay me to drive to move here. They paid my expenses, but that's basically it. We didn't have a lot of money, so there was a tight budget. So eating, people had to contact local community people, had to contact local bakeries. The same kind of stuff we did in New York, getting donations to survive. At the same time, people that were there had to develop certain skills. They had to have people in the kitchen. They had to have people who were doing interior maintenance. In other words, the building was structurally sound, but needed a lot of rehabilitation. So a lot of the work activities of the residents, as part of their treatment program, was that they were going to rehab the building. They were going to fix it up. They had to go out and get materials. We didn't have the money to get materials, so they had to go, get donations from people, make phone calls, get donations from supply houses, retailers. Do you have any extra paint that you don't need? That kind of stuff. Rugs. We used to get pieces of rugs and put them on the ground. We'd get the squares, and they'd have to sew them together and then maybe glue them down to the floor surface, and then fix the ceiling. I remember people in the very front. The ceiling was loose. The interior of the ceiling was loose, and they had to fix that up. So there was a lot of work for the residents to do, and the structure of Odyssey House, 1, 2, 3, 4 levels. The level 4s, of course, were the people that supervised the level 3s,
Right.
and the level 3s would do the number 2s. And then, of course, we would contact the police departments. We would contact mental health people, let them know we're in town. So there was a lot of work to get people to know what Odyssey House was essentially about. It was a drug-free community. We were doing urine tests. I guess probably the pioneers with respect to urine tests, because
Right.
the only thing we could do to establish credibility is to tell people in the community that our people are straight. They're giving up urine, and we're monitoring them. In fact, we had I used to supervise people urinating into cups.
That must have been fun.
Eyeball to eyeball. We didn't trust addicts to give urine, because we learned from experience that people would put urine in a balloon and have the balloon under their arm, and then run the tube down to their hands, and then and it was warm, urine was warm, and it would come out, and you wouldn't know it unless you're looking for it.
Right.
That's how some of the slick New York people used to get away with getting good urine, putting it. So that's how that basically functioned.
What was it like dealing? I should say, Marty's, you're a prominent lawyer in town now, but you weren't back then,
No.
right? What was it like going out in the Salt Lake community in 1971 saying, hey, we're Odyssey House, talking about the program, and also like asking people for donations and stuff? What kind of response did you initially get from conservative Utahns?
Well, the fact that we were all from New York already put a big red red flag up. People were really
Bunch of drug addicts from New York coming
into this nice, quiet neighborhood, and there was nothing. The community itself was fairly welcoming. I mean, the property on 68 South, group of New Yorkers coming in, drug addicts coming, ex-drug addicts coming in. The community was relatively welcoming. We didn't have any picket signs saying you don't belong in this neighborhood. So the community, I felt, was always kind of welcoming. I think where we had most of the heat, the local community wasn't. Most of the heat we got was from the professional communities who was just trying to find out what Odyssey House was about, a psychiatric drug abuse program, therapeutic community. I didn't see any community resistance. The resistance was just trying to get stuff so that we could survive, and that's where the resistance was. We had to pull people's arms. Hey, we're gonna go make you throw away a lot of food every day. We're gonna come get it if that's okay, and make arrangements that way. And we had people who were able to sell themselves on the phone to go pick this stuff up. I don't remember if we had a van. I don't remember if we had vehicles. I just don't remember how we get stuff, but we were pretty resourceful. We had to survive, and that's what made the core group. The core group was pretty tight in the sense that the people had to depend on each other in order basically to survive in the community. But I thought the community was really super receptive to us. The professional community didn't know what to think. We'd go to the university. We'd go to classes, social work classes, psychiatric classes. Judy would come to town, and she would go to the medical school. She would go to the law school, and basically drum up a lot of press. I don't know if you saw, there was an article that was done, I think, by the Salt Lake Tribune. Bob Ensworth was the director. He was the second director, but he actually lived in the house with 8 kids. He had 8 young kids, 5 of which I think were all adopted. He lived on the top floor. Him and his wife, basically, he was the director. He was the second director, but he was probably the director for 5 or 6 years here in Salt Lake. But there was a great article, family photograph of him with all the kids right in front of the building. So I imagine we can probably get a copy.
Boy, those were different days. If you think about it, you're obviously keenly aware of what's gone on in Salt Lake for years, and we've grown into, like, we treat almost 10,000 clients a year, have close to a $30 million budget now. Wow. 26 locations, 23 different programs. I mean,
I didn't know.
Back in 1971, did you guys have any idea that it would grow like that?
No, I think, at that time, Odyssey House was essentially corporate. It was kind of developing a corporate model where Odyssey House was in Michigan, New Hampshire. Utah was the furthest west, and possibly a program. Actually, there was a program in Flint, Michigan, because I went to that Michigan program. I don't know. I did some kind of not consulting, but they had some problems there with staff, so they asked me to come in and kind of calm things down. So, so I went to Michigan, and then the controversy about the corporate status hit, and then the corporation, I think, had to break up, and it was no longer a corporation run by one person. It became basically individual corporations in local communities without the supervision from New York or from Judy Ann and her staff.
We keep talking about Judy Ann, and for people who are watching, it's Judy Ann Denson Gerber, and she began in New York. And she was both a lawyer and a doctor, and the program expanded, as you said, corporately, and then everybody split off, and so we're Odyssey House of Utah, and we're just unique unto ourselves.
Right.
And so, and Judy Ann, she wrote this book, We Mainline Dreams, and you knew Judy Ann. She was a maverick at the time. because she basically invented the concept of the therapeutic community, which can you describe the therapeutic community?
Um, Essentially, how would you describe it?
It's hard to describe, but it's
A therapeutic community basically is it's a community of caring, a group of people that get together, and they all know everything about each other. If there's a problem one person has with another person, there's what they call confrontations. They go to group together, they work together, they basically wind up sleeping together, separate rooms, separate dormitories. But the therapeutic community means that everybody is aware of a person's strengths and a person's weaknesses.
And peer support is so important in our program, and that's basically
That's
a
right.
therapeutic community. So you achieve different levels within the program, and the higher you go, the more responsibility you have in taking care of the
Right.
lower levels,
Right.
while at the same time having professional people at the top.
Right, right. And I think part of the therapeutic approach is that the group itself that you were a part of went with you through your life activities. For example, if you had a wedding to go to, if you're going through a divorce, the people in your group pretty much knew what you were going through and were there basically to support you.
Because one of the bedrocks of coming clean and making it through a treatment program like this is total honesty, right?
Well, honesty was, was a key to any kind of therapy, in almost any kind of therapeutic setting. That you couldn't. The key was being honest, and a lot of the clients that we had, they were on the street, and a lot of them weren't actually used to telling the truth. So they had
You
people
think?
that knew them really well. They knew when they were lying. They knew when they were upset, and that was part of how you were getting support through the program. Because getting through the program wasn't easy. Getting through the program was hard, and the program would last 18. They would tell people 18 months to 2 years. People never saw themselves starting on day one going through a two-year program. So the therapeutic community, the therapy came about through interaction with essentially with your peer group.
And we last week we interviewed one of the first clients who came out with the New York group,
Right.
Gary Gingold,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked about Judy Ann Denson Gerber and his impressions of her. What did you think of her? How would you describe her? She's legendary in Odyssey circles.
Right. Judy was probably ahead of her time in terms of being a leader, in terms of being a doctor. I think she went to law school first, and then from law school she went to medical school. I think she was in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's law school class.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I think when I saw an interview when Ruth Bader Ginsburg was selected to the Supreme Court, I think Judy Ann, and about 4 or 5 other women from Columbia Law School, I think were essentially part of that interview. That's why I know that she went to school with Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
What was she like personally? Forceful, arrogant? How would you describe her?
She was pretty dominant. I would describe dominant in the sense that she gets what she wants, she's going to get.
And she did.
And she did. She was pretty dominant. She had a lot of people worshipped her. I mean, you talk about loyalty. Worship is not loyalty. It's more like worshiping. People believed in everything that she'd said. She wouldn't lie to you. She would tell you the truth. She was really super. She came across as being very bright, articulate. But she was kind of a unique in the sense that she was a woman in the 70s when women didn't come out or weren't supposed to come out or be as aggressive as she was. We had a meeting with some LDS church officials after we first came to Salt Lake City, And we met with some officials who I thought were really, really super sharp. And Judy, of course, was in the meeting, ran the meeting, and I don't know, I don't recall their impression, but must have been okay because we got a lot of support from from the LDS Church.
We we didn't get into your background, but you were part of a group called the Core Group that came out from what you call it, the Mother House
Part of the Mother House
in New York.
Right. We came out of. We started a core group that was in Manhattan. There were people that were part of that core group that were made up of people from basically all over the United States. They had some people from Utah, from New Hampshire, from Michigan, New York. It made up the core, group that was going to ultimately come out to Salt Lake City. So I was in effect chosen because of my desire to go west. And so when they were looking for someone to hire to go west, I says, well, Marty, you wanted to come when you first started working here. It'd be a perfect transition for you. So
it's a couple states away.
That's a couple of states away. So I decided I would go. That's when the core group, they had their first staff person that they trained locally who could take the Odyssey House model and kind of take it out west into Salt Lake City.
You were telling me before we started the podcast about your interview to get the job initially with Odyssey,
right.
And how long it lasted. Can you
Yeah,
share that?
The interview was lasted. I was supposed to be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I get there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Interview didn't end until almost midnight. And part of the interview was staff people, all the Odyssey House staff people were one side of the room. People that were interviewing for the job positions were on the other side of the room. And that we'd go around the room. They'd ask questions of people on one side of the room, would ask questions of the people who were being interviewees. And I stayed there not because they asked me, why do you want to work here? The job interview. Why do you want this job? And so my first response was, and I can remember it pretty distinctly, it says, well, I really want to work here. I'm on my way to California. I just got out of the military, and I don't really want to work here. So of course they jumped to the next person. And then they keep coming back to me. It's I'm here 2 hours now. I'm here 3 hours. Why are you still here? Actually, the real reason I was still there is because there was a young woman that was part of the interview process that maybe we'd go out after this thing was over. We'd have something. We'd go out and get some breakfast or something.
Potential girlfriend.
Right.
Okay.
And so after the interview was over at midnight, close to midnight, we're all leaving, and then they come out to get me and say, we want to see you right away. So I stopped. I went into this another large room, in which all the staff was there, and they were asking me about if I really wanted to leave, if I really didn't want to work here, then I would have left a long time ago. I wouldn't have sat through the whole thing. Of course, they didn't say in that interview that the reason I was here is because of this young lady I had eyes on. I didn't say anything like that. And so they offered me a job. I was the first person that they called. I think they might have hired 7 or 8 people. They offered me a job at that point in time, and Judy's response to me was, if you don't like it, you quit, you leave. No harm, no foul. So I said, okay. So at midnight, 12:30, I decided, okay, I'll start working. They want me to work next morning, New Jersey house, and so I accepted it, and it was probably one of the better decisions that I had made, because I didn't go to California, at least then, and it was on a personal level. It was a good transition from getting out of the military to work at Odyssey House.
Most important question: did you ever go out on a date with the girl who was sitting next to you?
Never met her. I never. After I was the first one they called. She didn't wait around. It was close to midnight, and so I never even knew her name. So.
8-hour job interview.
Yeah.
I've never heard of anything like that. You went on then, after you left Odyssey, you got your law degree, and you did what here in Utah?
Well, I worked at, initially, part of the story is after I graduated from law school, I took the California bar exam, and I'm kind of in Never Land. I took the California bar exam. I'm waiting for bar results. I'm planning on taking the Utah bar exam. In the meantime, I had to find some work. Since I was a vet, I was a disabled vet, I got a job with the Disabled American Veterans. I worked there for about a year. After I got my law license, the VA was, I was pretty unique at the time because it was unheard of to have a Vietnam vet who had a law license. And I was the only grad in law school. I was the only Vietnam vet that was in my law school class. And so the VA hired me. Hey, we want you to work for the VA. So I worked for the VA for about, I think it was almost about four and a half years. And I didn't like working for the VA. I did an interview. In fact, at the time I was working for the VA, I did a lot of pro bono work dealing with veterans issues. Even though the stuff I was doing at the VA was completely different than veterans issues, really. But I represented about 18 people pro bono in the Agent Orange lawsuit, which was resolved in 1984. At the time, it was the largest class action lawsuit settlement in history. It was a $180 million settlement. I represented 18 vets pro bono. None of those people got any money out of that settlement. I was interviewed on a national program, on a national news, because I was opposed to the settlement. Everybody would say, "Hey, it was a great thing." I says it wasn't. I was a part of that class. It wasn't a great thing. The amount of money that they were giving to people was very minor, especially basically because of the size of the class itself.
And how'd you get to Utah Legal Services?
Utah Legal Services is while I was working for the VA, a job opened up. I saw it in the newspaper, and I said, "Well, this would be a pretty good transition because I could still do VA stuff, outreach stuff, and represent vets on veteran issues." And they were going to allow me to do that. At the time, I was writing a column for it was a national veterans newspaper dealing with veterans issues. It was like they'd write questions to me and I'd answer them in writing, and it would go out. It was called Bravo. The newspaper was called Bravo. Anyway, while I was doing that, a job opened up in Legal Services. I applied for it. I interviewed for it. And they hired me for the job in Ogden, and I stayed in Ogden for about 5 years. And during that period of time, I went to court a lot, developing a lot of legal skills, did a lot of writing, basically put aside a lot of the veterans issues that I was dealing with. Still did some discharge review, discharge upgrades, and also did a lot of pro bono dealing with working with the VA. VA type claims. So I got to the transition from the VA to Utah Legal Services was a pretty good transition. And of course, I stayed there for about 30 years until I decided I was going to retire, which was last January.
What were clients like? I guess primarily heroin addicts back in the beginning. What would you say they were any different then than say somebody dealing with a heroin abuse issue now?
I can't. I don't. Back in the day, drugs were. It was like a societal. I mean, back in the '60s, back in the '70s, heroin was really a super bad thing. I think it's gotten worse today in the sense that you're seeing a lot more meth use, manufacturing meth. I think now combination people today use heroin because it's too expensive to get to buy drugs over the counter, so they'll buy heroin. Is there a difference? I don't know if I could answer that question.
What were they like back then? I mean, a lot of clients when they come into our program are pretty resistant to change and to honesty and to and living, by a structure.
That hasn't changed. I think today, if you can't get drugs, you steal to get the drugs. Usually the pattern is you start stealing from family, you start stealing from friends until they realize that this is a permanent thing, and then ultimately they show you the door, and you wind up continuing to hustle on the street. So I think in that sense, things really haven't changed. Perhaps it would change if if drugs became legalized, and you wouldn't have to hustle for it. You wouldn't make it into a crime in order to get drugs. It wouldn't be criminal. You'd be going to get your heroin. Maybe there's a pharmacy you'd go and you get a prescription, but it wouldn't cost you anything. Of course, you'd be required to go into some kind of a treatment program. So I don't think the perceptions have changed. I think you're greasy, you're coming off the street, you're living on the street, or you're at home, and you're selling everything you own, and until you wind up being kicked out onto the street. So.
Did you see a lot of success back then with the program, or were there a lot of people dropping out, or?
Well, I think the question was, you have to define what success is.
Completion, maybe.
Completion of the program in Odyssey House, to go for you probably saw 5% or less of the program population that graduated from Odyssey House after the 2 years, for example, or longer. 5% from day one wind up graduating. Out of those people that graduated, they usually did fairly well. There was a lot of turnover early on. What I mean by the turnover is that you start the program and you don't like it and you drop out, and you start the cycle of using drugs, going to a treatment program, leaving the program, using drugs, and the cycle just begins and over again. Now even the courts now, they almost expect you to fail, and they'll give you chances to get back into a treatment program. So I think getting into rehabilitation and being successful in rehabilitation is, I think, it's not just stopping drugs. It's the whole community concerning the drugs
right.
itself. It's the community. You have friends that are connected with drugs. And so if you leave the program, you go back to your friends, and what are the friends doing? They're using drugs. You're going to get right back into it. You almost have to break to be successful. You have to break with all your old habits, and that's the part that I think is most difficult. So to make the break, that's why length of time is so critical. You got to completely break from your past. Those friends that are still using out there, if you go back to them, you're going to start using again, because it's social. It's kind of a habit thing. You're going to go back to it because that's what you know.
We only have about a minute left. How would you assess the impact of your years working at Odyssey in terms of how it influenced the rest of your life?
Hey, look, my history was I was a pretty angry Vietnam vet when I got out of Vietnam. Still am. I never used drugs. Odyssey House, essentially, I was even though I was a staff person, I was really part of that core group. People had my back. They were concerned about me. They were concerned about what I was doing, why I was alone, why I was a loner. My anger was put, some people use drugs when they were angry. Me, I went academically. That's the direction that I went.
A little more constructive.
Yeah, more constructive. I never even in the military, I didn't use drugs. My outfit was pretty much on the run, not on the run, but we were always moving around. It was hard to get your hands on drugs. But most of the guys in my outfit didn't. But Odyssey House changed the community itself. People had my back. I was the same age as the residents. We were in that same age, so you're all kind of growing up. You're all kind of growing up together. Different experiences. I never had any therapy session, but I used to piggyback. Piggyback in the sense that there were some vets that were in Odyssey House, and I would be part of it. I would be part of a group or part of their groups, and we would talk about individual different experiences. So I don't know if I don't think things would have been the same had I not been a staff member or not involved with Odyssey House. I met my wife through Odyssey House. I mean, she was with welfare and worked with welfare, and we met at we used to call it a concept group, where we used to talk concepts, life, and it was open to the general public, and so she was part of that group. I think my life has changed because of the experiences that I lived with and the people I know. I'm still friends with Gary. I'm still friends with Bernie. It's not like they're friends of mine. I mean, it's not like I'm a staff person, so I maintain a distance because I used to be a staff member here. So anyway, I think it made a major change in my life because it forced me to grow up, deal with the issues that I was dealing with. That, you know, as a vet, as a person that was just basically growing up through the 70s.
Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. Marty Blaustein has been our guest as we celebrate Odyssey's 50th anniversary, which you probably had no idea we were going to be celebrating, or that you would be doing a podcast.
I knew that Gary mentioned before he went to New York that he was going to when he comes back, he's going to contact us. We knew it was the 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
I mean, November 1st is the 50th. And so we knew that we were going to, Gary's the one that was going to contact the Odyssey House people. And are you guys doing anything? Because we were at the 25th anniversary.
Right.
And the 25th anniversary was at, I'm trying to think of where it was. I don't know, was it one of the Odyssey House facilities? Bob Ensworth was around then. But we knew that he was sick and probably dying. But we saw a lot of the people from the core group came out that was here, that was still living in Salt Lake City at the 25th anniversary. So we knew something was going to happen. Well, we didn't know how to approach it, how to how to get things going, but do something. At 50 years, even with COVID-19 out there.
That's why we haven't had a big celebration this year. So this is part of our
Celebration
recognition of the anniversary.
Right. Well, it's something. You need to do something. 50 years is a long time ago.
It really is.
We're not going to see another 50, but this is
Neither
the one
you
got.
nor I will. No,
That's
I know.
right. That's right.
Odyssey House may. But
Maybe, yeah. But I didn't realize Odyssey House has gotten to be so big and has a $30 million budget. That's a $30 million budget.
That's big.
Yeah,
Thanks,
that's
Marty.
A pretty good program. Thank you for inviting me.
Appreciate having you, and I love hearing these stories. Thank you for watching another edition of Odyssey House Journals.